Ashes of the Soul Forged, Chapter 2, As Observed by Me, Phyellis of the Quiet Accord. Part 2, Choice Under Pressure. I am Edrin, he said to the empty road, son of Brand, apprentice smith. I am... Who was he really? The boy who died in his father's forge, or the thing that had risen in his place? The hand that wielded sorrow's edge, or the will that tried to master it? The sum of stolen memories, or the core that struggled to remain itself despite them? The philosophical weight of it made him stumble. His foot caught on nothing, just air and uncertainty, and suddenly he was falling. 3 different sets of reflexes tried to catch him. The result was a graceless sprawl that left him face first in road dust, the sword's weight driving the breath from his lungs. For a moment he just lay there, tasting dirt and his own foolishness. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It started small, just a huff of air that could have been mistaken for a cough. But it grew, feeding on its own absurdity, until he was shaking with it. Here he was, carrying a God-cursed blade and the memories of 3 dead soldiers, brought low by the simple act of walking. All that stolen skill, all that inherited experience, and he couldn't manage to put one foot in front of the other without cosmic crisis. The laughter felt clean. It belonged to no one but him. When it finally faded, he pushed himself up and found he wasn't alone. I observed the woman before Edrin noticed her, as was my nature and my privilege. She sat on a boulder beside the road, perhaps 20 paces ahead, watching his ungraceful display with the patient interest of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. Middle-aged, wearing travelling clothes that had seen better decades, she possessed the particular kind of weathering that came from choosing roads over roofs. Her hair, more grey than brown, was bound in a practical knot that spoke of hands more concerned with utility than beauty. She was nobody, a vagrant, a wanderer, the kind of person who passed through the margins of history without leaving ripples. She was also touched by the divine, though she might not have known it herself. I felt it in the way probability bent around her, subtle as a whisper. Not the heavy-handed interference of gods like Nethrix, who reshaped reality to suit their whims. This was older, quieter, the kind of touch that came from being in the right place at the right moment, too often to be coincidence. She waited until Edrin's laughter died completely before speaking. "Bad morning for Grace," she observed. Her voice carried the burr of the eastern provinces, softened by years of wandering. Though I've seen worse, once watched a Silvershore cavalryman trip over his own importance, full armour, parade ground, reviewing stand full of nobles, the sound he made hitting cobblestones. She shook her head, like someone dropping a kitchen's worth of pots down a well. Edrin climbed carefully to his feet, hand instinctively checking that sorrow's edge remained wrapped and secure. The blade whispered its location, always here, always ready, always hungry, but he ignored it with the practice of 3 days' resistance. I wasn't... He stopped, unsure which voice would emerge. When he spoke again, it was with deliberate care. I'm still learning to walk, it seems. Aren't we all? The woman produced an apple from somewhere, polished it on her sleeve, and took a bite. Though most of us figure it out by your age, you're what, 15? 16? 15. The truth came out before he could consider whether lies might serve better. She studied him with eyes that seemed older than her face suggested. Carrying a lot for 15. That sword for 1. Looks heavy. Every instinct screamed danger. Mars' paranoia, Voss's tactical assessment, Rawn's brutal pragmatism. All three dead men agreed. She'd noticed too much, knew too much. The safe choice, the smart choice, would be to. Sorrow's edge pulsed with eager agreement. One quick draw, one clean strike, one more memory added to his collection. She was alone, unarmed, unsuspecting. It would be easy. It would be safe. It would be not hungry, Edrin said firmly. The woman raised an eyebrow, didn't offer to share, though. She considered the apple, then tossed it to him in an easy underhand arc. You look like you could use it more than me. He caught it without thinking. Muscle memory providing the coordination his conscious mind would have fumbled. The fruit was mealy with age, bruised from travel, but his stomach cramped with want at the sight of it. When had he last eaten? The forge, that final dinner, Hannah's bread and. He bit into the apple before the memory could complete itself, letting the sweetness push away the taste of grief. There, the woman said. Now we're travellers who've shared fruit. Much harder to murder someone you've taken food from. Laws of hospitality and all that. Edrin nearly choked. I wasn't going to murder me? Good. I'd hate to ruin your morning twice. She stood brushing dust from her patched skirts. Walk with me a while? Road's easier with company, and you look like you could use someone to catch you next time you pick a fight with your own feet. Her name was Mira. The cosmic irony of that did not escape me. Another Mira entering Edrin's story just as the first had left it. But where his sister had been sharp-eyed and fearless, in the way of children who haven't yet learned the world has teeth, this Mira carried the specific fearlessness of someone who'd been bitten often enough to develop immunity. No family name, she said when Edrin asked. Lost it somewhere between Dragon's Bend and Good Sense. These days, I'm just Mira who walks, or Mira the fool, depending on who's asking and how much they've drunk. They travelled together through the morning, maintaining the careful distance of strangers who hadn't yet decided if they were threats to each other. She filled the silence with inconsequential chatter, observations about bird calls, complaints about the road's condition, a rambling story about a merchant who tried to sell her a map to buried treasure that turned out to be his own outhouse. Edrin found himself relaxing despite the voices in his head counselling paranoia. She reminded him of the travelling tinkers who'd passed through Oakhaven, full of words that meant nothing and everything, creating comfort through the sheer normalcy of human noise. But I saw what Edrin couldn't or wouldn't let himself see. She guided their path with subtle pressure, steering him away from a fork that would have led to a military checkpoint. She increased their pace when passing a grove where bandits were known to shelter, though she framed it as eagerness to reach shade before noon. When they stopped for water, she chose a spring that ran clear when half the wells in the region had been fouled by the drought. She knew the land like someone who'd walked it for years, or like someone guided by instinct sharper than knowledge. So, she said as they rested in the shade of an ancient oak, going to tell me why you're carrying death on your back? Or are we maintaining the polite fiction that it's grandfather's walking stick? Edrin's hand had moved to Sorrow's edge before he could stop it. The blade sang its eagerness through the touch. She knows, she threatens, she would taste of roads and secrets, but he forced his fingers to relax. It's just a sword, he said. Mira pulled out a pipe, packed it with something that smelled of herbs and patience, and lit it with practiced ease. Just a sword. Like I'm just a woman, and you're just a boy, and this is just a road. She blew smoke that twisted into shapes too deliberate to be natural. Words are interesting things, true and false at the same time. I don't want to talk about it. Fair enough. She pointed the pipe stem at him. But here's free advice from someone old enough to be foolish. Carrying a thing and being owned by it are different creatures. One'll tie your back, the other'll eat your soul, worth knowing which you're doing. The accuracy of it hit like cold water. Edrin looked away, unable to meet those two knowing eyes. What if you can't tell the difference anymore? Then you're asking the right questions, which is more than most manage. She stood, knocking ash from the pipe with economical taps. Come on, there's a village ahead, nothing fancy, but they make bread that's almost worth eating, and their well water doesn't taste like regret. I don't have coin. Neither do I, but I've got stories, and that's currency enough in places forgotten by the tax collectors. She grinned. Unless you'd rather sleep rough again? You look like you're carrying enough nightmares to make that interesting. She couldn't know how right she was. Every time Edrin closed his eyes, 3 dead men showed him their worst moments, their crimes, their justifications, their final seconds of understanding that violence given always circles back as violence received. But a bed sounded better than another night of cold ground and colder memories. All right, he said, but... The scream cut through afternoon quiet, like a blade through silk. Human distress has a particular quality that bypasses thought and strikes directly at instinct. The scream that reached them was high, young, and spoke of terror beyond a child's ability to process. It came from ahead, perhaps 300 paces, where the road curved around a thick stand of pines. Edrin moved before conscious decision could form. 3 sets of combat reflexes merged into motion, launching him forward at a sprint that ate ground with predatory efficiency. Behind him, Mira shouted something. Warning or encouragement, he couldn't tell over the blood rushing in his ears. He rounded the curve and took in the scene with eyes that had witnessed too much violence to be surprised by its shapes. A wagon, overturned. One wheel spinning lazy in the air like a prayer wheel, grinding out futility. A man face down in the dirt, blood pooling beneath him in accusatory spread. A woman trying to shield 2 children, boy and girl, perhaps 6, Andy 8, while 3 men in mismatched armour decided how to portion out cruelty. Not soldiers. Their kit was too irregular, their bearing too undisciplined. Deserters, maybe, or just bandits playing at military dress. The distinction mattered less than the sword one of them was raising toward the woman who'd run out of anywhere to retreat. Sorrow's edge sang its joy as Edrin drew it from its wrappings. The blade emerged like dawn breaking. If dawn were the colour of dried blood and carried the promise of ending rather than beginning. The red gem at its heart pulsed faster, synchronized with his elevated heartbeat, eager as a hunting hound finally slipped from its leash. Yes, it whispered. Yes, finally. Yes, they are cruel. They deserve this. Feed me their cruelty and grow strong on their strength. The first bandit died without knowing death had arrived. Edrin moved through him rather than to him, sorrow's edge opening a red smile across his throat in passing. The man had a moment to look surprised, hand half raised to the wet warmth spreading down his chest, before the blade began to feed. It was different from the forge. There, grief and rage had driven him. Here he moved with the cold efficiency of inherited skill. Mar's experience guided his footwork. Voss's discipline kept his strikes economical. Rawn's brutality ensured each blow counted. But underneath, some part of Edrin watched in horror as his body became a weapon's extension. The dying bandit's memories flooded in as sorrow's edge drank deep. Garrett. His name had been Garrett, Farm boy turned soldier, turned deserter, turned predator. Each transformation justified by hunger and the unfairness of a world that gave much to few and little to many. His first kill had been an accident, a tavern brawl gone wrong. His latest would have been the woman now scrambling away from the fountain of his dying. The second bandit managed to turn, to raise his own blade in defence. It didn't matter. Edrin flowed around the parry like water around stone, 3 lifetimes of sword work compressed into a single moment of lethal grace. Sorrow's edge found the gap between leather plates, slipped between ribs with a lover's intimacy, and began its feast. This one was Marcus, younger. He'd joined for coin and stayed for the easy cruelty of the strong against the weak. His memories tasted of sour wine and the particular kind of fear that masquerades as aggression. He'd been afraid every moment of his life, afraid of being hungry, afraid of being hurt, afraid of being nothing. Now he was becoming exactly that. The third bandit tried to run. It was the smart choice, the only choice, really, when faced with death wearing a 15-year-old face. But Sorrow's edge had been denied for 3 days. It was hungry. It was eager. It would not be cheated of a full meal. Edrin's body moved without his permission, launching into a sprint that caught the fleeing man before he'd made a dozen steps. The blade took him in the spine, punched through leather and flesh and dreams of escape with equal indifference. This one was Tom. Just Tom. A follower who'd never made a choice that wasn't suggested by someone stronger. His memories were grey things, full of "yes, sir," and "if you say so," and the quiet desperation of someone who'd traded conscience for belonging. He'd been dying inside for years. Sorrow's edge simply finished the job. 3 deaths, 3 feasts, 3 more voices added to the chorus in Edrin's head. He stood among the corpses, breathing hard, the blade dripping satisfied in his hand. The children were crying. Their mother held them close, staring at him with eyes that couldn't decide if he was salvation or simply a different flavour of damnation. "Are you—" He had to stop, sort through 6 different speech patterns to find his own. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head minutely, unwilling to speak to something that killed with such terrible ease. Fair enough. He wouldn't trust himself either. Mira arrived, not breathing hard despite the run. She took in the scene with those 2 old eyes, lingering on the corpses that looked more drained than simple death should leave them. "Well," she said mildly, "that's one way to handle introductions." The family they'd saved was named Covenant. Thomas Covenant lay face down in the dirt, 3 crossbow bolts decorating his back like accusations. His wife Sarah held their children, Marcus and Eleanor, with the desperate strength of someone who'd already lost half their world and refused to release the rest. They were cloth merchants from Last Haven, fleeing south with what they could carry when it became clear the border war would not respect neutral parties. "We thought the back roads would be safer," Sarah whispered, while Mira helped her move the children away from the bodies. Thomas said soldiers would stick to main routes. He was right. It wasn't soldiers who found us. Edrin stood apart, still holding Sorrow's edge. The blade hummed contentment, glutted on death and memory. 3 more lives swirled in his head, their petty cruelties and smaller kindnesses mixing with what was already there. 6 perspectives now, 6 sets of instincts, 6 different ways to see the world. His head felt too full, like a wineskin filled past bursting. "You need to clean that," Mira said, nodding at the blade. "Blood left to dry makes steel brittle. even steel like that. It was such a mundane observation, the kind of thing Brand would have said, that Edrin almost smiled. He found a clean patch of grass and ran it along the blade's length, watches the red disappear into hungry metal. Sorrow's edge drank that too. Waste not, want not, every drop a tiny spark of potential. "What are you?" Sarah asked suddenly. Her voice carried the brittle edge of someone past fear into whatever comes after. "You moved, you killed them like it was easy," Edrin finished. "Because it was. Because this thing," he lifted the blade slightly, "makes it easy. Makes it feel right. Makes it feel good." The honesty tasted bitter, but necessary. "I'm what happens when gods meddle and men break." "You're a boy." "I was." Mira interrupted before the conversation could spiral darker. "Philosophy later. Practical matters now. Sarah, can you drive a wagon if we write it? Good. Edrin, you're young and strong and currently radiating enough menace to scare off wolves. Help me flip this thing." The wagon was heavy but intact. Working together, they managed to right it, though Edrin had to consciously manage his strength. 6 lives worth of muscle memory wanted to help. The result was almost comical. Him trying to lift with his own 15-year-old strength, while ghostly impressions of stronger men argued about technique. They loaded Thomas Covenant's body with what dignity they could manage. Sarah said nothing, but her children sobbed with the particular abandon of those too young to understand permanence. The sound scraped at something in Edrin's chest. Marcus was about the age Garrett had been when he'd watched his own father die of fever. Elena reminded him of Tom's sister, sold to a Silver Shore pleasure house to pay family debts. The stolen memories made everything personal, made everyone human, made killing both easier and infinitely harder. "There's a shrine about 2 miles south," Mira said as they prepared to move, "dedicated to Ashara the Gentle. The priests there take in travellers. They'll see to the body, help the family." "Will they take in someone like me?" Edrin asked. "Someone like you?" Mira studied him with that unnerving directness. "You mean someone who saved a family from butchers?" "Yes, I think they'll manage. The blood on your hands isn't the kind they refuse. All blood looks the same when it's spilled, but not all spilling is the same. You think those men would have stopped with robbery, would have left witnesses?" She shook her head. "You did what needed doing. The fact you hate how easy it was means you're still human enough to matter." They walked in processional silence, the wagon creaking complaint, the children's sobs fading to hiccups, the afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold and grief. Edrin walked behind, far enough to provide warning, but not so close as to frighten. Sorrow's edge across his back whispered suggestions about the road ahead, the forest around them, the potential threats and potential meals that populated both. He was learning to parse its communication. The blade didn't use words so much as impressions, flashes of possibility, hints of power waiting to be claimed. It showed him how much stronger he could become, how much faster, how much more. All he had to do was feed it. All he had to do was stop saying no. "I am not you," he murmured to the weapon. "Not yet." It agreed with something like patience. "But time is my ally, not yours. Every battle you survive because of me brings us closer to unity. Every life you take to save another justifies the next taking. You will find reasons. They always do." "They?" But the blade fell silent, content to let that question fester. The shrine of Ashara, the Gentle, squatted beside the road, like comfort made stone. It was not beautiful in the way of grand temples, No soaring spires or golden domes here. Instead, it possessed the particular beauty of function wedded to faith. Grey stone walls thick enough to withstand storms, both natural and political. A roof of red clay tiles that had weathered decades without complaint. Gardens that spoke of careful tending by hands that understood hunger. The priests who emerged as their small procession approached were cut from similar cloth. Plain robes of undyed wool, faces weathered by sun and charity. They took in the scene, wagon bearing a corpse, woman clutching children, dangerous boy hanging back, and made their calculations with the arithmetic of mercy. Peace to travellers, the eldest said. Her voice carried the rasp of age grinding down prettiness into something more durable. I'm Mother Kess. You looked like you've had a hard road. Bandits, Sarah managed. My husband. We'll see to him, Mother Kess promised. And to you. Come. There's food and washing and beds that don't move with the wind. They bustled Sarah and the children inside with practiced efficiency. Grief was no stranger here. Neither was sudden death or the particular exhaustion that came from surviving what others didn't. The shrine had been tending such wounds since before Silvershaw learned to pretend at Empire. Edrin stopped at the gate. Sacred ground had weight when you carried profane steel. Problem? Mira asked. I don't think... He gestured at the peaceful gardens, the small cemetery where carved stones remembered lives lived gently. This blade and that place don't belong near each other. Maybe that's exactly why you should enter. Oil and water don't mix, but sometimes that's what makes the medicine work. She studied him. When did you last eat? Properly eat, not just road apples and regret. His stomach answered before he could, growling complaint that seemed absurdly mortal given everything else. When had he last eaten? The forge. That final dinner. His mother's bread and... Come on, Mira said, not waiting for an answer. Even dark powers need feeding, the regular kind, not the soul-drinking variety. She led him not through the main entrance but around to a side door that opened on the kitchen gardens. Here, practicality ruled supreme. Rows of vegetables grew in military precision. Herbs perfumed the air with promise of flavour and medicine. A few chickens pecked at bugs with the focused intensity of those who had one job and took it seriously. An older priest, Brother Francis, by his own introduction, was pulling carrots with the methodical patience of someone who'd learned that rushing vegetables helped no one. He looked up as they approached, took in Edrin's wrapped sword and wary posture, and made his own calculations. Mira who walk, he said. It's been months, still collecting strays? Only the interesting ones. This is Edrin. He has a complicated relationship with violence and needs simple things. Food, rest, maybe some time pulling weeds to remember that hands can nurture as well as harm. Brother Francis studied Edrin with eyes that had seen enough to be surprised by little. Can you work? I'm a smith. Am. The confusion of tenses made his head hurt. I know how to work. Good enough. Wash at the well. Supper's in an hour. You can help me finish this row. Honest labour settles the spirit better than prayer sometimes. He paused. The sword stays outside the chapel proper. We'll not insult Ashara's peace with naked steel, whatever its nature. It was so reasonable, so mundane, that Edrin felt something tight in his chest ease slightly. Here was a problem with a simple solution. Rules that made sense. Work that helped rather than harmed. He washed at the well, cold water shocking away some of the fog that came from too little sleep and too many memories. Then he knelt beside Brother Francis and began pulling carrots. The work was different from smithing, but similar in its rhythm. Grasp, pull, shake, loose the dirt, move to the next, simple, repetitive, clean. "You're carrying a lot," Brother Francis observed after they'd worked in companionable silence for a while. "6 lives' worth," Edrin agreed before he could catch himself. "Ah." The priest pulled another carrot, examined it for spots, set it in the basket. "One of those. We had another come through, must be 10 years back. Carried a spear that screamed, literally screamed. Every thrust sounded like someone dying badly, which I suppose was the point." "What happened to them?" "Jumped in the river eventually, drowned themselves and the spear both, probably for the best. They'd stopped being able to tell which thoughts were theirs." He glanced sideways at Edrin. "You seem to be managing better. It's only been 4 days. "Only." Brother Francis laughed, not unkindly. "Boy, I've seen men break in 4 minutes. 4 days of holding yourself together while something tries to eat you from the inside? That's strength."
The story continues, as all stories must. Find the next chapter at Codex 11. Subscribe, lest the Forge's call go unheard. The Forge is patient, but it does not wait forever.